All I ask is you actually hear me out, then you are allowed to go to the comment section and call me an idiot. Now, I first want to recap with what we were talking about last week. Last week, we were saying that we are expecting a big week for the Chicago Bears going up against another bottom five offense with the Washington Commanders. And afterwards, we're going to be looking to sell Justin Fields and DJ Moore. Well, they did way better than I was expecting. Now they have way more value than I even thought they would. And I don't want to go deep on these guys just yet because we will be talking about them later on and you will hate me for it. But our next guy we talked about, Christian Kirk, for a little bit. My thought process was, okay, if Zay Jones comes back in, we saw that previously Christian Kirk was only being used in 3 wide receiver sets, both in the preseason as well as week 1. Well, we were wrong, ladies and gentlemen. Looks like Christian Kirk will officially be in 2 wide receiver sets based off the usage that we had this past week. You had Christian Kirk with 73 snaps. You had Calvin Ridley with 75. Now, yes, Zay Jones did see a knee injury in the second half, and yes, the snap data is not 100% predictive or 100% given of what will happen going forward. But still, nonetheless, even before the Zay Jones injury, Christian Kirk was in there in 2 wide receiver sets. I was wrong to say to sell him high. I think that he looks like he can be a low-end wide receiver 2, high-end wide receiver 3 rest of season. Now, going over to our next guy, Romeo Doubs was a clear sell high guy for us. I mean, just what we've historically seen when you were looking at Christian Watson and Romeo Doubs in this offense is we've seen 12 games where they played together. And in those 12 games, you had Christian Watson dominating and you had Romeo Doubs only with 8 fantasy points per game. Whereas the 6 games with no Christian Watson, he was up at 11.5. Now, Romeo Doubs came out. He had a whopping 1 reception for 4 receiving yards. Now the question isn't, do we sell high on Romeo Doubs? The question is now, do we cut Romeo Doubs? And I don't know about that. Then we talked about Brandon Ayuk saying that we are due for a George Kittle game, that Deebo Samuel was fully healthy, that they were going to disperse targets in this offense. Brandon Ayuk this past week in a game where the 49ers dropped 42 points. He had 58 receiving yards. He had 4 receptions. I mean, with Ayuk, still think that he's pretty good wide receiver, clearly in an elite level offense where the 49ers have scored 30, 35, and 42 points. Now, I've seen that you've had a reset with the Brandon Ayuk value in fantasy football as of late. You know, I'm live streaming every single night where it seems like people are now not viewing him as mid to low end wide receiver 1 as they were a few weeks back. It looks like now more and more people are realizing that this is more so a mid wide receiver 2. And at that price point, I do think that Brandon Ayuk is a hold from here. And then we are talking about selling George Pickens before you had Deontay Johnson coming back. And yeah, Pickens, a great game this past week. And I think this is the perfect moment to still sell high on George Pickens before you have Deontay Johnson in here. We've seen 18 games from George Pickens with Deontay Johnson in Pittsburgh. But with the 4 games we've had with no Deontay Johnson, George Pickens has been dominant. In those 4 games, he's averaged 16.5 points, whereas in the 18 games, he's only averaged 9.5. This is why we called George Pickens a buy low candidate immediately after the Deontay injury, after he disappointed in week 1 against the 49ers. And why now I am completely fine saying after we rode up that value after buying low, we are going to be selling high before we have Deontay coming back in, because I do think Pickens will be a high-end wide receiver 3. I don't think he'll be a top 24 wide receiver with Deontay in here. Now, let's go over to some guys that I'm saying to sell this week. And yes, I have to talk a little bit more in depth about Justin Fields, DJ Moore. Now, my initial plan was we were selling Justin Fields and DJ Moore in this week. And then after they went out there and just absolutely dominated Washington, I was like, okay, I don't know if I can turn on the camera. I don't know if I can face everyone and say DJ Moore is still a sell high candidate. After doing the research, he is, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, you had DJ Moore this past week, absolutely dominating with 230 receiving yards, 3 receiving touchdowns, off of only 282 Justin Fields passing yards. Let me repeat that. Justin Fields had 282 passing yards and DJ Moore 230 receiving yards. Absurd. DJ Moore clearly is a top-end talent. DJ Moore looks phenomenal. And everybody who watched that Thursday night game, which it was on primetime, so I'm assuming every single person watching this video watched that game, saw exactly what the ceiling is and saw exactly how DJ Moore looks. And that has caused DJ Moore to skyrocket to be a wide receiver 1 in a lot of people's minds. Now, if you're going to look at where I ranked DJ Moore in our rankings this week, I mean, we were still a little bit conservative. We had DJ Moore as the wide receiver 10 and a good matchup going up against Minnesota, despite him being the wide receiver 4 from a points per game perspective. We have him directly behind CeeDee Lamb. We have him directly behind Amon-Ra St. Brown. I have him directly behind Cooper Kupp, Keenan Allen, AJ Brown, and I would sell DJ Moore for any of those individual players. Because if you go through and look at the volume that DJ Moore has had so far this season, he's been not living off the volume, and instead he's been living off of efficiency. And it's great, right? You're really happy to see that, and you're really happy to go through and say, oh, okay, well, that means he's a good receiver. I mean, that is true, right? He has had 34 targets, 531 receiving yards. The man is out there averaging almost 15 yards per target and has had 5 receiving touchdowns off of 34 targets, a 13% touchdown rate. These numbers are phenomenal. These numbers are great. And ultimately, at the end of the day, they are unsustainable. And it's very hard to imagine that they are going to be able to go out there and they are going to be able to keep this up. Now, another example of how we can view this, just in case you want to see, if you look at the expected fantasy points based off of this type of volume versus the actual fantasy points, this is going to be coming from PFF. You see that DJ Moore has an expectation of 57.2 fantasy points based off of this volume, and the actual points that he has scored, 110. That is a delta of 53 fantasy points. That is the highest mark for any wide receiver in fantasy, only ahead of Tyreek Hill, Stephon Diggs, Nico Collins, Keenan Allen, Brandon Ayuk, and Gabe Davis. There are going to be 2 things that probably happen. The Chicago Bears are going to realize, oh crap, this guy's good, and we need to get him the ball even more often. I think the volume may come up a bit, but unless DJ Moore is going to go down as the most efficient wide receiver in NFL history, this kind of efficiency cannot maintain. There's no way it does. Now, your other sentiment will be, Mason, well, what happens if we were just wrong about the Chicago Bears? What if the Bears are actually good? Well, we go over to Las Vegas Sportsbooks right now, and the Bears have an over-under of 4.5 wins rest of season. Now, the over is being bet on heavily. It's minus 170 for the over of 4.5 and plus 140 for the under 4.5. But nonetheless, this shows us that whether the line should be 5.5 instead, Las Vegas Sportsbooks are telling us the Bears will still be a very bad team going forward. Then you have to ask, well, how have they been so good over the past 2 weeks? And if we find an answer for that question, it's staring you in the face. Who has been the worst defense in the NFL this season from a points per game perspective? The Denver Broncos have allowed the most points per game at 36.2. In NFL history, this is the second worst defense of all time through the first 5 weeks. So they played an all-time bad Denver Broncos defense. And they followed that up with a Washington defense that is second in the NFL currently in points allowed. So you had the 2 best possible matchups, leading to an insane rate of efficiency that most likely will be coming down. And Las Vegas Sportsbooks are telling us that you should not fundamentally change your view of what you have with these guys, while at the same time, you can get out at a very nice price tag. If I can sell DJ Moore and go get Amon-Ra St. Brown, if I can sell DJ Moore and go get CeeDee Lamb, those would be 2 wide receivers that I would sell him for relatively easily. Now, on the Justin Fields side of things, Justin Fields is still a sell as well. Now, in terms of creating a trade, sending off Justin Fields, I think we're going to have to be a little more unique, because I don't want to be selling Justin Fields for Justin Herbert. I don't want to be selling Justin Fields for Joe Burrow. Fields still has the rushing upside, which makes him a great fantasy quarterback, as we've said all year, right? I still stand by. I don't think Fields is a good real-life quarterback, but I think he's a great fantasy one because of his rushing upside. However, if we're able to pivot off and avoid these dud games and go to a quarterback that has a significantly higher floor while at the same time a similar ceiling, such as Patrick Mahomes, Jalen Hurts, Josh Allen, that is something I'm wanting to do. Now, of course, we're not going to be able to trade Justin Fields straight up for one of those guys. If you can, you go for it. But instead, what you're probably going to have to do is you're probably going to have to take Justin Fields and then a depth wide receiver such as Hollywood Brown, package them together to go out there and get that elite level quarterback. Those would be the plays that I'm looking to make. Here's my data explaining why. Please let me know in the comment section if you disagree with me, because I know a lot of people will. You know, Bears fans, Justin Fields fans are some of the most passionate fans in the entire NFL. And they are very, very willing to let you know when you're wrong. Now, let me go ahead and pull up our next guy. And as I do this, let me remind you, if you have not done so already, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel if you play fantasy football. And if you want to check out any of those pick'ems over on Underdog Fantasy this week, you can find that link in the description in the comment section. Underdog has DJ Moore for 61.5 receiving yards. If you think we're wrong, if you want to go take more than 61.5, you do you. And if you use promo code FLOCK, you're going to get a 100% deposit match. Plus, you're going to be getting a Patrick Mahomes special pick'em for Thursday night, more than less than half a total yard. And Underdogs are going to everybody up on top of that with our rest of season fantasy football rankings and a Justin Herbert special pick'em, more than less than half a total yard for Monday. So please make sure you are taking advantage. But going over to our next wide receiver, I will be looking at DK Metcalf here. With DK Metcalf, this is a receiver that I want to say, yes, we've called him a sell high before, and we've gotten some hate for it. And I know a lot of people go, Mason, why do you keep saying to sell Metcalf? Metcalf is great. Metcalf is an alpha. And I think this is a big issue that we have in looking at actual points scored in fantasy versus looking at how the player appears on the field. Because you look at DK Metcalf on the field and you're going, oh my gosh, this guy should score a zillion fantasy points. This guy looks like a wide receiver that was created in a lab. It's so fun to watch him play. He is such a talented wide receiver overall. And then you dive under the hood real quick and you go, okay, well, what's actually going on here? And you realize that DK Metcalf over the past 2 seasons, despite people in the comments section telling me he's been great, has actually only gone out there and been the wide receiver 26 and the wide receiver 30 from a points per game perspective. DK Metcalf over the past 2 years has been a wide receiver 3 in fantasy. Now going to this season, has this changed because DK Metcalf is seeing a different role? Has this changed because DK Metcalf is getting more volume? Or did DK Metcalf through the first 4 weeks just get a bump in efficiency that may come back down later in the season? In my mind, he got that bump in efficiency that may be coming back down later in the year. With DK Metcalf, he's had 23 targets. This is in comparison to Tyler Lockett at 27. This is in comparison to Jackson Smith-Njigba at 20. Now, with that being said, DK Metcalf has been significantly more efficient than these other players. And that's why I do have DK Metcalf ranked higher than these other guys in our rest of season rankings. That's why I have DK Metcalf ranked higher than them now. I mean, DK Metcalf, if you look at my rankings currently, we have ranked as a mid wide receiver 2. I have him currently at wide receiver 19. But if I'm able to pivot off of DK Metcalf and instead go get someone like Chris Olave, instead go get Jalen Waddle, instead go get Devonta Smith, I think that makes a lot of sense, preparing for DK Metcalf to potentially have a slight downgrade when it comes to his efficiency in this offense, especially if Jackson Smith-Njigba, the rookie, the ascending player, begins to take a little bit more. I think that may come from both Lockett and Metcalf just a bit. Not saying you have to sell DK Metcalf, but if you can get one of those other wide receiver ones, it would be interesting. Now, I'm going to be super hesitant when I talk about this next guy because he has been way better than I've ever imagined. If you look at my rest of season rankings on flockfantasy.com, you'll see we have him as a top 5 tight end rest of season. Sam Laporta is out there straight crushing it. Sam Laporta this season, almost 300 receiving yards through 5 games played as a rookie tight end, has had 25 receptions and 3 receiving touchdowns. Sam Laporta has been great from start to finish and way better than I would have ever imagined a rookie tight end to be. Now, with this being said, we're not going to be talking about what he has done. We're going to be talking about the value we can get today and how Sam Laporta's usage may change going forward. Because if you are looking at Sam Laporta, my issue is you may have more weapons entering into this phenomenal Detroit Lions offense where the Laporta usage goes down just a bit and if the efficiency with the touchdown category falls as well, it may be a double whammy that makes Sam Laporta viewed as a top 3 tight end rest of season, down closer to the tight end 6, down closer to the tight end 7 rest of season. Because with Sam Laporta, we now have gotten to see him with no Amon-Ra St. Brown this past week, scoring 2 touchdowns. With Sam Laporta, he hasn't had to deal with Jamison Williams all season. And with Sam Laporta, you've also had no Jahmyr Gibbs. And while Gibbs definitely has been a very disappointing running back, we know Gibbs is not going to be involved between the tackles as a rusher. Jahmyr Gibbs was drafted inside the top 15 picks of this year's NFL draft, so they could get him involved as a receiver, especially close to the line of scrimmage where Sam Laporta naturally operates. So if we were going to go through and look at this, I'd say, well, you know what? Maybe it's an interesting idea to go ahead and see if we can pivot off of Laporta and get to TJ Hawkinson and get to Mark Andrews. You know, one of these other tight ends that we have a larger sample of dominance where we may not have to worry about Amon-Ra St. Brown coming back in. We may not have to worry about Jamison Williams coming in. We may not have to worry about Jahmyr Gibbs coming in, and we may not have to worry about him possibly not scoring a touchdown on 1 out of every 10 targets going forward. He's still great. I'm not telling you to go out there and sell him for a bag of peanuts, but if we can sell him as an elite level tight end with potentially some of these red flags coming in, I think it would make sense. And then our last player I want to talk about quickly will be DeAndre Hopkins. If you're looking at Hopkins, comes out, crushes this week in a very good matchup against the Indianapolis Colts, has 140 receiving yards off of 11 targets. And with Hopkins, I'm a little bit concerned that the volume may come down. He's had no competition whatsoever in Tennessee. I mean, if you're looking at the other receivers that have been running routes here, you've had Nick Westbrook-Ikhine, you've had Chris Moore. I don't expect that Treylon Burks comes in and Treylon Burks is the wide receiver 1 here. I think that clearly is DeAndre Hopkins, but I do think that Treylon Burks comes in and probably has a larger role and is probably a more effective receiver than Nick Westbrook-Ikhine. And I think fundamentally, this is a very bad Tennessee Titans offense with very bad quarterback play, where DeAndre Hopkins is a little bit more prone to injuries, knowing that he's going into year 10 of his NFL career. And if we could sell him as that mid-wide receiver 2, and if you could pivot off of DeAndre Hopkins, get Garrett Wilson, get Jalen Waddle, get Chris Olave, get Devonta Smith, get Nico Collins, get Brandon Ayuk, really anybody inside the wide receiver 13 to wide receiver 18 of our rankings this week, I think that would make a lot of sense. But I think that's all I have for you. If you have not done so already, go down there, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel if you play fantasy football. And if you disagree, if you want to go take DJ Moore to have more than 61.5 receiving yards this week on Underdog, you can find that link in the description. You can find that in the comment section. Promo code FLOCK, you'll get a 100% deposit match, plus our rest of season fantasy football rankings and tiers. Plus, you'll be getting a Patrick Mahomes special pick of more than less than half a total yard. And on top of that, you're going to be getting a Justin Herbert special pick of more than less than half a total yard on Monday. But I think that's all I have for you. Again, thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. I really do appreciate you and really hope we get to see you out in the live stream later tonight.